Okay, so you've sent over some really interesting stuff for us to look at today.
Yeah.
We're going to be diving into the cryptocurrency market from a couple different angles. We've
Well,
got some stuff here from Coinbase and then also like a more general market summary.
right.
So I guess our mission today is to kind of like synthesize those two different perspectives
Yes.
and try and figure out what's going on in the crypto world right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I thought maybe a good place to start would be with that global crypto market capitalization number.
Okay. Yeah.
The summary we have here says it's been kind of like fluctuating between like $2.69 trillion
Wow.
and $2.91 trillion.
Yeah. It's a lot of money.
It's a huge amount of money.
It's huge.
And then they also mentioned that it's gone up by like 1.72% just in the last day alone.
Yeah.
I mean, what do we make of those numbers? Like, what does that tell us?
Well, it tells us that this market is, incredibly significant.
Right.
I mean, when you're talking about trillions of dollars,
Yeah.
and even a small percentage increase, like 1.72% translates to, billions of dollars flowing into the market.
Right.
So, and the fact that it's fluctuating so much,
Yeah.
between those two big numbers,
Mm-hmm.
I think that just shows how sensitive it is to all these different factors, macroeconomic news, regulatory developments, technological advancements,
Right.
all of that can have an impact on, how much money is flowing in and out of the market.
Okay, so then, obviously we have to talk about Bitcoin.
Of course, yeah.
So it looks like it's trading right around $86,000.
Okay.
And the summary also mentions that like broader economic factors are impacting the price of Bitcoin.
Right.
And they specifically mention like interest rate discussions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't quite understand how something like discussions about interest rates could have such a huge effect on Bitcoin.
Well, you have to think about it this way.
Okay.
Interest rates, they set the tone for the overall investment environment. So when central banks like the Federal Reserve, they start talking about potentially cutting interest rates,
Okay.
it can make riskier assets like Bitcoin more appealing to investors
Right.
because they're looking for higher returns than they might get from, traditional investments like bonds.
Oh, okay.
So, and then the opposite is also true.
Yeah.
If interest rates are expected to rise, then investors might pull back from riskier assets like crypto.
Interesting.
So even though Bitcoin operates outside of the traditional financial system,
Uh-huh.
it's still influenced by, these macroeconomic factors and the sentiment of investors,
Right.
their appetite for risk.
Okay, so like Bitcoin is actually trading around $85,625 right now. So that seems to align with what you're saying about these interest rate discussions.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so now we have to talk about XRP.
All right.
Because it sounds like there's been some pretty significant developments there.
Yes.
It looks like there was a resolution with the SEC, and that has allowed XRP to list futures contracts.
Right.
And that seems to be a pretty big deal because our summary here says that it led to significant gains for XRP.
It did.
It says it jumped up by as much as 12% at one point
Wow.
before stabilizing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great example of how legal developments can have a huge impact on, crypto valuations.
Okay.
Because, this resolution,
Yeah.
it basically provides some regulatory clarity around XRP, and that, makes investors more confident about its future.
Right.
And then the fact that they can now list futures contracts, that's also a big deal.
Okay.
Because it opens up XRP to, a whole new group of investors.
So what are futures contracts exactly?
Futures contracts, they're basically agreements to buy or sell an asset at a specific price on a future date.
Okay.
And they're often used by institutional investors for hedging and speculation.
Okay.
So the fact that XRP futures contracts are now available, it signals a growing maturity for XRP as an asset, and it could potentially attract more institutional investors.
Interesting. Okay. So it wasn't just XRP that was doing well at T's. It sounds like Ethereum, BNB, and Solana, they were all seeing positive movements.
They were, yeah.
Ethereum specifically was trading around $1993.
Okay.
And then the summary just mentions like percentage gains for BNB and Solana.
Right.
I wonder why that is. Like, why wouldn't they give us a specific price for those as well?
Yeah, that's pretty common, these market summaries.
Okay.
They'll usually give you like specific prices for the most heavily traded assets, like Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Right.
And then for other cryptocurrencies, they might just mention like the general trend,
Gotcha.
whether they're up or down.
So basically we should be taking away from this that the positive sentiment we saw in the market, it wasn't just limited to like Bitcoin and XRP.
Right.
It seems like the more established layer one blockchains were also doing well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the new listings that we've seen on Coinbase.
Yeah.
It looks like they've added Maple Finance, which is Surupi Renzo, which is REZ, and then Cookie DAO, which is Cookie. Those were all added in March. So I guess what can we learn from Coinbase adding these new assets to their platform?
Well, I think it shows us that the crypto space is constantly evolving.
Right.
You have all these new projects that are being developed all the time.
Yeah.
And exchanges like Coinbase, they play a really important role in bringing those projects to a wider audience.
Okay.
And so, the fact that we're seeing listings like Maple Finance, which focuses on decentralized lending, Renzo, which operates in the liquid restaking sector,
Okay.
and Cookie DAO, which represents a decentralized autonomous organization.
Right.
I think it just highlights the diversity and the increasing specialization of the projects that are being built within the blockchain ecosystem. So we're seeing, continued innovation and growth across a lot of different subsectors of crypto.
So Coinbase also mentions their Coinbase 50 index being up by 1.87% over the last 24 hours.
Right.
I mean, what is that index exactly, and how should we be interpreting it?
So the Coinbase 50 index, it's basically a basket of the 50 largest and most liquid cryptocurrencies that are listed on Coinbase.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a snapshot of the overall performance of the major players on the platform. And so when you see it move up like it did by 1.87%,
Yeah.
it generally means that a lot of the bigger, more actively traded assets on Coinbase are seeing their prices go up.
Okay.
And that often reflects like broader market sentiment,
Interesting.
but it gives you a more specific view of how things are performing on Coinbase itself.
All right. So of course we can't talk about crypto without also talking about security.
Of course not. Yeah.
It seems like there are still a lot of scams out there.
Unfortunately.
Our summary mentions a Binance impersonation scam that happened in Australia.
Right.
So I guess what are some of the things that people need to be aware of to stay safe in this space?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just always be really cautious,
Okay.
about any unsolicited communications that you receive.
Right.
Double check the authenticity of any platforms or individuals that you're interacting with. And, always remember that if something sounds too good to be true,
Right.
it probably is.
Makes sense. So it looks like the broader economic climate is still having an effect on the crypto market.
Yeah, it is.
The summary mentions that the Federal Reserve's decision to keep interest rates unchanged actually led to a positive reaction in the crypto market. They said it boosted investor confidence.
Right.
So we talked earlier about the connection between interest rates and crypto, but this is like a real world example of that playing out.
It is, yeah.
So it seems like decisions made by central banks about monetary policy, they can have ripple effects across various asset classes.
They can, yeah.
And it's clear that crypto is no longer like an isolated entity.
Yeah.
It's connected to the rest of the financial world.
So finally, I want to mention all the different things that Coinbase offers on their platform.
Yeah.
Really quite impressive.
It is.
They've got everything from beginner-friendly guides to sophisticated trading tools.
Right.
They have their own wallet. You can earn crypto through their platform.
Right.
They have a Coinbase card.
Right.
And they even have resources specifically for businesses and developers.
Yeah.
Plus, they have that Coinbase Bytes newsletter to keep people updated on all the latest news. I mean, it's amazing how these platforms are becoming like these comprehensive hubs for everything crypto.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point.
Okay.
Coinbase and other platforms like it.
Right.
They're not just places to buy and sell crypto anymore.
They're building these whole ecosystems.
Yeah.
That cater to a wide range of users, from beginners to experienced traders and even businesses.
Yeah.
So they're providing all these educational resources, different products, newsletters. And I think that's all part of an effort to, educate people about crypto.
Yeah.
And encourage more adoption of digital assets.
Okay, so to kind of sum up everything that we've talked about today, it seems like the crypto market is generally in a positive trend right now.
It does seem that way. Yeah.
At least in the short term.
Right.
But we also know that it's a very volatile market.
That is, yeah.
Bitcoin is obviously still a very important indicator.
Uh-huh.
XRP has seen some big gains thanks to that resolution with the SEC.
Right?
And it seems like other major cryptocurrencies are also doing pretty well.
Yeah, they are.
We've also got all these new assets that are being listed on exchanges like Coinbase, which shows that innovation in this space is continuing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And of course, we always have to remember about security
Right.
and being careful about scams.
Definitely.
And finally, it's clear that the crypto market is increasingly connected to the broader global economy.
It is, yeah.
So what do you think are some of the things that people should be keeping an eye on in the crypto space in the coming weeks?
Well, I think it's important to pay attention to both those internal factors,
Okay.
things like technological advancements and regulatory developments,
Right.
and also external macroeconomic conditions.
Okay.
Because, all of those things are going to continue to have an impact on the crypto market.
Right.
And it's a dynamic and evolving space.
Yeah.
So, continuous learning and careful navigation are going to be key.
So that's a great question for all of you listening out there. What are you going to be keeping an eye on in the coming weeks?
Yeah, what are you watching?
This has been a fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it is.
We'll catch you next time.
See you later.